Hello and welcome to another Atypical Philosopher video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. Not an awful lot of movement on the front lines today, but I am going to walk you through those front lines and give you a few bits of stimulus for discussion concerning what is going on, particularly with regard to the consistent drone attacks and cruise missile attacks on the energy infrastructure around Ukraine. So again, more shelling last night here. The governor Mykolaiv says that they shot down 12 attack drones in his region, while in Kryvyi Rih, electricity has been cut for many after a strike hit energy infrastructure. So yesterday, just to let you know, Mykolaiv is down here in the south near Kherson, and Kryvyi Rih, which is Zelensky's hometown, is just northeast of there. Zelensky has said that 30% of the power stations have been hit. But actually, it's kind of worse than that, because it's not just the power stations, but it's the substations and the distribution network for energy around there. So you could say as much as 40%, maybe around there, of energy capacity to consumers has been taken out. That is absolutely devastating. So if a country has no energy, you have no electricity, that is just crippling for the economy, crippling for your state of mind, crippling for everyone being able to do anything. Okay, so this is hugely problematic, which is why Ukraine have been calling out for Iron Dome, which is the Israeli air defense system. But the thing is, Israel is much smaller than Ukraine, and most of those rockets that system is set up for are sort of dumb rockets that they can work out the trajectory for, and see where they're going to land, and then decide whether they're going to hit them or not with their own missiles. And they can have lots of these sort of installations all around Israel to give sort of an Iron Dome, so to speak, over Israel. That's just, you just can't particularly do that around Ukraine as a whole. You can maybe do it around certain cities, but I think Ukraine certainly wants, because apparently recently Iron Dome has been very useful against drones. So Ukraine just want expertise. They want some assistance and expertise from the Israelis, who've got some experience in dealing with that. But they just need an awful lot of air defense systems and help, because if Ukraine really do have 2,500 drones on order from Iran, then that is massive, and a bit of a problem. Iran is, of course, denying this, but then news has come out through Reuters. It's behind a paywall, so here's kind of a free version referencing it. But apparently, the Iranians met with the Russians on October the 6th, and the Russians have asked for more drones and Iranian ballistic missiles with increased accuracy, including the Fateh and Zulfikar family of missiles, said one Iranian diplomat briefed on the trip. This is, there is evidence coming out that Iran, are indeed supplying Russia, as everyone knows, and this is just a huge problem. Many of these drones and pieces of kit are being manufactured with components that you would find in normal everyday kit. So how do you put sanctions on that, short of sanctioning Iran utterly and completely of all kind of trade? Some people advocate for that, but it's just more difficult than you might think. The blackouts are caused, as the BBC says here, 1,162 towns and villages that have had blackouts after the Russian strikes, and it is just incredibly challenging. What's going to be done about that? Well, it is just all about air defense systems, and whenever Russia do better in some kind of context, actually NATO and the West step up and say, yeah, okay, you do need these, and pretty much Russia. So NATO have just said that they will be providing a bunch of air defense systems. I don't know what that's going to look like and what that is, but something to combat these drones. That is the big problem. Okay, let's look at the front lines. Let's go first of all up to the northeast, to Oskil. And I haven't really talked about the Oskil much because it's been further down to the southeast. So we have the Kupiansk-Svatove-Kreminna front line. We've been talking mainly about this area and a sort of bit up here towards Kupiansk. So actually I'm going to concentrate a little bit on the area around Kupiansk and a little bit north of there. There's not been much movement anywhere else, but there are some some developments around Kupiansk. So Kupiansk North. I was saying yesterday how this is slightly out of date. This map, it's just a nice, useful, colourful map to be able to kind of see the area. You've got Svatove there, Kupiansk there. This town has been liberated, and you've got movements to the east and a push to the northeast, Vilshane particularly. So this is either liberated or it's at least partially under the control of the Ukrainians, and they're pushing towards Peshotravnevi here and Orliansky just south of there. But let's look a little bit north up here. So here is, and I'm using the terrain map here because I think it's useful to know where the tree line is and the river that comes down. So this is the Oskil River, comes down here. Here's Kupiansk, and you've got Svatove down here to the south down there. And this is Vilshane that I said yesterday. I said was liberated. Which is either liberated or it's they're pushing strongly in Vilshane, and the Russians are wanting to hold on to that as much as possible. So the key, I guess, here are these roads supplying Vilshane. So you've got a road here going to the northeast, and you've got a road going north up to Tavolzhanka. So Tavolzhanka is a place that is, again, has been contested for some time. It is under Russian control. But the supply roads are very important if Russia want to keep this Vilshane area. They need to be able to obviously supply their troops. Now, the Ukrainians appear to be pushing towards Orliansky down here and towards Peshotravnevi and northeast. So if they do this, then they cut off this supply road from Ivanivka, which means you've got this northern road only to supply all of this area down here. Now, the Ukrainians would love to obviously flank here, but while the Ukrainians are pushing northeast here, the Russians appear to be doing a counterattack towards the Oskil River and across it, pushing the Ukrainians back to the Oskil. They don't have an awful long way to go here. They don't have a lot of wriggle room to the east of the Oskil. And this may just be to sort of give them a breather for their supply routes and to allow them to dig in maybe in Vilshane and supply that better. But they don't seem to be concentrating on pushing back the Ukrainians as much as they are pushing westwards. So that's what's going on sort of northeast of Kupiansk. There are movements from both sides, and we'll see how that develops. As we come further down, so this is Vilshane down to Peshotravnevi, Ivanivka. So it doesn't look like any of these, there's been any change of territory there, at least not that I've heard. And we come down to Svatove, and then we hit the Kherson River, and then come down to Kreminna down here. So in the Kreminna, Rubizhny, Severodonetsk, Lysychansk sort of urban area, there's been all these constant claims of Russia attacking to the west and attacking Terny, Torsky, Dubrova. That's still going on, and I think it's just a case of giving them time to dig in further and better in these areas to the east. These settlements are under constant shelling, it appears, and I don't know that the counterattacks have actually taken any settlements. Russians might tell you differently, but as Noel here says, consolidating and repelling. So no map changes. Russia shelled Torsky and Zarichny. Russian forces keep attacking northwest of Kreminna, and the Ukrainian has a defensive line there. Most likely these attacks are meant to give the units inside Kreminna extra time for defensive positions. So that's the same as it has been for days. And here's another map, again, to show that all of these places on the Ukrainian defensive line, or the Ukrainian front line, are being shelled by the Russians. So the Russians this is all in artillery range. They are consistently shelling these places. Life is not very nice there. I'm not sure about the accuracy of this map I was just talking about Kupiansk here and how the front line is here along the Oskil River and these tree lines, and we've got the front line way to the east over there. One thing that is worth noting actually, so the reason why I think the Russians want to push westwards here is this is all in a tree line, and Ukrainians throughout this whole war have shown how good they are at hiding in forests, hitting supplies, hitting vehicles with anti-tank munitions, and then running back into the tree line. So if they can push those Ukrainians back further and further, then it protects that line. As I said, it did, but just to let you know how important that tree line is there. Anyway, sorry, just forgot to say that. Okay, so again, same old, down to Kreminna. Let's go down to Bakhmut here. So the Bakhmut map looks something like this. Again, the war map hasn't changed this map much because it's only a matter of meters, but there is a little bit of development just to let you know where Bakhmut is. To remind you, Bakhmut is here in the northern Donetsk front line before we get to Luhansk and up to Kreminna. So just sort of south of Kreminna along the front line there. So Bakhmut, what can I say about that? Well, the Russians are trying to encircle Bakhmut, and this has been the claim that they are sort of making ground. The claim has been going on for months, as Wagner mercenary group are doing most of the heavy lifting around here. But even though they are supposedly, the better troops and doing a better job, it is something of a stalemate, despite what Russians quite often say. And I was saying yesterday that really you've got a grey zone on the eastern suburbs of the town, and Soledar but Bakhmutsky is the attempt to encircle to the north, and the attempt to encircle to the south was Epitny and Ivanorad here. But actually, it looks like the Russians, I said this yesterday, were moving towards Klishchivka from Odradivka down here. Well, it turns out that they've done that, so the front line looks something like this, and Klishchivka is under threat. You might note, of course, that this is mainly fields here, and indeed this sort of mini kind of bridgehead up here across the road is mainly fields. So what it means to control a bunch of fields, I'm not sure. But certainly you can see the attempt coming in to encircle. I guess if the Russians try and encircle to the north without taking back Mutsky and Soledar, which are really struggling to get a foothold in, there's been consistent fighting there for a long time. If they make that move, then of course they are able to be cut off by Ukrainians coming through Soledar. So they obviously need to watch that. They really do need to take these settlements if they want to properly encircle Bakhmut. But I would say coming from the south is definitely going to be the easier option, just because it's mainly open land. And once you've got Klishchivka, you've got Ivanivsky as well. But then the thing about open land is you are susceptible to drone, artillery, all sorts of stuff. You can't. There's not as much place to hide. Okay, so there is a little bit of movement in Bakhmut. The other place I've been talking about quite a bit is Avdiivka. Again, just very minor movement there. The attempts from the south, which is to move out towards Pisky, through Pisky and into Pervomaisky. That's the movement south, and then the movement to north of Avdiivka, and the attempt again is to encircle that, but again, not a lot of movement there. Okay, let's go to Kherson, and what I want to say about Kherson is no movement there. There's nothing to be said about troop movements, but there is this impending sense of something's going to happen very soon, and again, the idea that when there's a media blackout, something's going to happen. Either things are going very badly for the Ukrainians, or they are just about to launch something big. And it looks like it's something big. It's the latter rather than the former, because this morning, Russian occupiers in Kherson have sent an SMS text message to every resident calling on them to quote, urgently evacuate due to threats of shelling from Ukraine's forces. Ukraine is getting close to liberating the region. I believe the invaders will withdraw to behind the river. And there's lots of talk. So you've got, Dr. Evil, or is it the guy from Little Britain? I'm not sure. You've got Sergei Surovikin. Actually, I shouldn't mock at all, because this guy is the butcher of Syria and responsible for the deaths of countless innocent people, civilians. So you've got this guy who has come onto TV and said some things that are really quite revealing. So the enemy continually attempts to attack the positions of Russian troops, Surovikin said in his first televised interview after being appointed earlier this month. And he's come on and said, actually, things are tense there, things aren't looking good. So the BBC reports this as the Russian army will, above all, ensure the safe evacuation of the population of Kherson. But he admits it is difficult there. Please take my words seriously. I'm talking about evacuating as quickly. So this is actually from the official Kirill Stremizov, who warned the Kherson residents that in the very near future, Ukrainian troops would launch an assault on the city. Please take my words seriously. I'm talking about evacuating as quickly as possible, he said in a Telegram message. So this could be an example of an organized withdrawal. So there's now talk that the Russians could actually not just evacuate their civilians, but could indeed evacuate their troops. Now, if they do this, I mean, you could say this might be a fairly sensible thing to do because they just can't supply them. This is death by 1,000 cuts. It's going to be a Greek tragedy eventually. So you might as well leave on your terms rather than leave on Ukrainian terms. Now, if that's the case, that would be the best thing for the Russians because they would lose the least amount of troops, but they would lose a lot of equipment because they wouldn't be able to get all their heavy equipment from here across the river with all the bridges blown, especially in a fairly hasty withdrawal. That would be a huge loss for them because there's an awful lot of equipment this side of the Dnipro River. The Russians have announced that collaborators will be given housing in Russia, I believe. So this is serious. This isn't just some kind of propaganda project. It looks like Russia could pull out of this whole region to the west of the Dnipro, this river here. I would suggest they do that because it will save them the most amount of troops. But as I say, there's going to be a huge loss of morale and heavy equipment, which means capability. And then what does that mean for all those troops, leaving from there? And the ability for Russia to then, protect the freshwater to Crimea, because this is all about the Kakhovka dam here. So if you are giving up this whole region, are you giving up the dam? Now there's talk about whether they would blow the dam, because this is obviously energy infrastructure as well, but it would knock out so many people down here. I mean, this would be a huge amount of water rushing down there. It would be an absolute, it's not as if Russia haven't already been doing sort of war crime after war crime. That would be just an even more terrible step along the road to, moral oblivion. But if they do that, then that would be pretty terrible for the remaining inhabitants of Kherson. Maybe that's why they want to get them out, because they're planning on doing that, and that will really ruin sort of energy infrastructure a very long-term basis, because you couldn't just rebuild that so easily as maybe you can rebuild power, electricity substations and whatnot. But anyway, so that's going to be the central component of this withdrawal from Kherson if it happens. It's what happens to that dam. Anyway, there you go. Please check out my extra later on today, where I'm going to be talking about war crimes and Russia's predilection for, breaking humanitarian law. And thank you so much for hanging out. Please like, subscribe, share, and if you fancy supporting my channel and also reporting from Ukraine, you can go to uasupporter.com/ATP, and I do get a little bit of commission for any purchases of any of these sort of clothing or extras. So you can even get, if you want a drawstring bag, get a drawstring bag. Show your support for Ukraine. And as I always say, if you're pro-Russian, you might not want to do that. There you go. Okay, thank you. Take care. Speak later.